Evelyn Carter had always believed her marriage was built on stability. From the outside, she and Michael looked like the perfect couple, two people who had weathered life storms together, raising their son, keeping a home, and maintaining the image of a steady family. But behind the closed doors of their quiet suburban house, something had been missing for years. Michael worked long hours, often leaving early in the morning and returning late, carrying the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He was a good man, dependable, respectful, and faithful. Yet Evelyn often felt invisible in her own marriage, like a shadow in the corners of a life that had once been vibrant. She remembered when Michael used to surprise her with flowers, when he would hold her hand for no reason, when his laughter filled their evenings. Those moments had faded into routine. Conversations had turned practical, centered on bills, groceries, and their son's school. Evelyn loved him, but she longed for something she couldn't name, something beyond the dull rhythm of everyday life. It was during the summer break when their son brought home a friend from college. His name was Daniel Hayes. From the moment Evelyn opened the door to greet him, she felt a strange shift in the air. Daniel was in his early 20s, tall, with a certain confidence that seemed out of place for his age. His smile lingered longer than necessary, his eyes curious, studying everything around him with a boldness Evelyn hadn't felt in years. She tried to brush it off as nothing more than youthful charm, but as the days passed, she noticed how easily Daniel slipped into conversations, how he complimented her cooking, how he made her laugh in ways Michael hadn't in a long time. His presence unsettled her. Every word, every glance, seemed to press on the cracks that already existed in her marriage. One evening, while setting the dinner table, Evelyn caught Daniel watching her from the living room. It wasn't the look of a guest admiring his host, it was deeper, more deliberate, filled with unspoken meaning. She quickly turned away, pretending not to notice, but her hands trembled as she placed the plates. She reminded herself that he was just a friend of her son, a young man who had no business looking at her like that. And yet, part of her couldn't deny the way it stirred something she thought had long died inside her. Michael remained oblivious. He was polite to Daniel, even grateful for his company, since their son seemed happier having him around. Michael trusted Evelyn completely, never questioning her silence, never sensing the quiet storm that had begun to brew within her. His kindness, ironically, made her guilt sharper, though nothing had yet happened. Nothing, except the quiet battle raging in her heart. The turning point came on a weekend morning. Michael had mentioned running to the market to pick up a few things. Evelyn, almost without thinking, encouraged him. "Yes, go," she said, her voice just a little too eager. "Your son's friend is here. I'll keep an eye on things." She watched as Michael left, unaware of the significance of his departure. The house grew quieter in his absence. Her son had stepped out with other friends, leaving only her and Daniel in the space between the walls. Evelyn moved through the kitchen, pretending to tidy up, while every sound seemed amplified: the ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the sound of Daniel walking slowly toward the doorway. She felt his presence before she turned. When she finally looked up, he was standing there, leaning against the frame with that same bold, knowing smile. "You don't have to keep busy just because I'm here," he said lightly, his voice steady, almost teasing. Evelyn's breath caught, though she tried to disguise it with a laugh. "I'm just making sure everything is in order. Guests should feel comfortable." "Comfortable," he repeated, stepping a little closer. "You make this place feel like more than comfortable. You make it feel alive." The words were simple, but they pierced her. She wasn't used to being seen that way, not anymore. She tried to brush it off, shaking her head. "You're too young to know what you're talking about." Daniel tilted his head, his eyes never leaving hers. "Maybe. But I know how to see what others overlook." Silence stretched between them, heavy and dangerous. Evelyn turned back to the counter, her hands moving aimlessly, her mind racing. She knew this was wrong. She knew she should create distance, step away, call for her son, anything to shatter the fragile line she was about to cross. But she didn't move. Part of her wanted the moment to linger, to feel what it was like to be noticed, to be admired, to be desired. Daniel didn't press further. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to ignite a spark Evelyn had long thought extinguished. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway jolted her back to reality. Michael had returned sooner than expected. Evelyn's heart raced as she quickly returned to her tasks, forcing a calm expression onto her face. Daniel straightened, giving her one last look, half a smile, half a promise, before slipping back into the living room, as though nothing had happened. When Michael walked in, arms full of grocery bags, he greeted her with the same gentle warmth he always carried. "I got everything you asked for," he said, setting the bags on the counter. Evelyn smiled, but it was strained, her mind still echoing with the dangerous silence that had filled the room just moments before. That night, as she lay beside her husband in bed, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She listened to the steady rhythm of his breathing, the quiet trust in the way he slept without worry. She turned to face the ceiling, haunted by the look in Daniel's eyes, by the thrill she had felt, and by the fear of what it meant. She told herself it was nothing, just imagination, just loneliness playing tricks on her. But deep down, she knew something had shifted inside her, something she wouldn't be able to ignore, and though nothing had happened yet, she could already feel the weight of a secret pressing against her heart, a secret that whispered of temptation, of choices, and of consequences she wasn't ready to face. The following days were heavier than before. It was as if every corner of the house carried a memory of what almost happened, every silence between words was thick with unspoken truths. I tried to go about my life as if nothing had changed, but the truth was, everything had. Ethan's presence haunted me even when he wasn't around. The way his eyes had lingered, the way his hand had rested on mine, the way my body had betrayed me with its yearning, it all lingered in my thoughts like an echo I couldn't silence. Michael's behavior, too, began to shift. There was a sharpness in his gaze whenever Ethan was mentioned, a subtle but undeniable awareness that something was not quite right. He teased less and watched more, his smiles feeling heavier, edged with suspicion. I found myself avoiding his eyes, afraid that he would see too much. Afraid he already had. One evening, when Ethan had not been around for a few days, Michael found me in the kitchen. I was drying dishes, lost in thought, when he leaned against the counter, his arms folded across his chest. "You've been quiet lately," he said casually, but his tone carried a weight that made me uneasy. I offered him a faint smile, brushing off his comment, but he didn't move. "Emily," he said after a pause, his voice lower now. "I've seen the way you look at him." My heart stopped. The plate in my hand slipped slightly, and I had to grip it tightly to keep from dropping it. I forced a laugh, tried to dismiss it, but Michael's eyes didn't waver. He took a step closer, his presence filling the small space between us. "Don't bother denying it. You don't look at me that way." "Not usually." His words struck something I wasn't prepared for. The air seemed to thicken, and before I could respond, he reached out and gently touched my arm. His hand was warm, steady, and though I should have pulled away, I froze. "Daniel's not here," he whispered, his voice trembling ever so slightly. "And I can't pretend anymore." I backed away, searching for words, my chest tight with panic and confusion. "Michael, this isn't right," I managed to say. But my voice lacked conviction. My own heart betrayed me again, fluttering with a mix of fear and something I couldn't name. Michael stepped closer, his eyes fixed on mine. "Maybe not," he admitted. "But it's real. And you feel it too." His hand brushed against mine, lingering in the same way Ethan's had. My breath caught. For a moment, it felt as though I was standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground shifting beneath me, temptation pulling me down. I closed my eyes, wishing the moment away, but instead, it deepened. His hand slid into mine fully, fingers interlocking, and I felt the rush of heat in my chest, the dangerous comfort of being wanted. For a second that stretched like eternity, I let it happen. I let the silence wrap around us, let his closeness fill the empty space inside me, but guilt hit me like a wave, pulling me back. I pulled my hand away abruptly, turning from him, my voice barely a whisper. "I can't do this." My shoulders trembled, the weight of everything pressing down. Michael didn't push further. He stood still behind me, silent, but I could feel his eyes on my back. The room felt suffocating, and I wanted nothing more than to escape. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was torn in pieces, Ethan's gentle honesty, Michael's bold confession, Daniel's trusting voice in my memory. I was caught between loyalty and desire, between what I knew was right and what my heart had already begun to crave. The loneliness I once thought was unbearable had now been replaced by something far more dangerous, a web of temptation that threatened to consume me. The next day, Ethan came again. He arrived while Michael was out, and the moment I opened the door to see him standing there, my resolve cracked. His eyes softened when they met mine, and without a word, he stepped inside. The silence was heavy, but this time there was no pretense, no shield of casual conversation. We both knew what was lingering between us, that we sat across from each other, the distance between us filled with tension. I tried to look away, but his gaze held me captive. "You've been on my mind," he admitted softly. His voice carried no hesitation, no disguise. My heart raced, the truth in his words striking me with both fear and longing that I wanted to tell him to stop, to walk away before it was too late. But instead, I found myself leaning closer, my voice barely audible. "You shouldn't say that." Yet even as the words left my lips, my body betrayed me, inching toward him, drawn by a gravity I couldn't resist. When his hand found mine again, this time I didn't pull away. I let the warmth sink in, let the moment swallow me whole. The world outside didn't exist, there was only his touch, the thundering of my heart, the unspoken confession between us. We didn't need words. Everything was there in the silence, in the closeness, in the quiet surrender of two people who had crossed too many lines already, but just as quickly as it began, it shattered. The sound of the front door opening, Michael's voice calling my name, sent us both reeling back. Ethan rose abruptly, his eyes filled with regret and urgency. "I'll go," he whispered, and before I could stop him, he was gone, slipping out the back door as Michael's footsteps echoed closer. That I stood frozen in the living room, my breath uneven, my hands trembling. Michael entered, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the room. He said nothing, but his silence was louder than any accusation. I knew he suspected. Maybe he had even heard enough. That night, the guilt consumed me entirely. I felt trapped in a nightmare of my own making, caught between two men I should never have allowed into my heart. Daniel's call came unexpectedly, his voice filled with warmth and excitement. "Emily," he said, "I have good news. I'll be coming home soon." My throat closed, and I could barely respond. The joy in his words clashed violently with the storm inside me. He was coming back, the man I had promised myself to, the man who trusted me beyond measure. Yet all I could think of was how I had betrayed that trust, even if only in moments, even if only in emotions I had never meant to feel. As the call ended, I stared into the darkness of my room, tears blurring my vision. My heart raced with fear, shame, and confusion. Soon Daniel would return, and I would have to face the truth, about Ethan, about Michael, about myself. I pressed a hand against my chest, whispering into the silence, "What have I done?" But there was no answer. Only the echo of my own voice and the weight of choices I could never undo, and so the story remained unfinished, a fragile secret waiting to shatter, a storm that had only just begun. The days that followed carried a strange rhythm I had never known before. My mornings began with the same routine, coffee brewing in the kitchen, David leaving early with a distracted kiss on my cheek, and the house falling into its heavy silence. But now, there was something new lingering in my thoughts. I found myself listening for footsteps outside, waiting for that knock on the door, or glancing through the window to see if Ethan might pass by. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something deeper, something that lived in the small spaces of my day. I started noticing details about him that I hadn't before, the way his hands moved when he worked, the quiet focus in his eyes, the warmth of his smile when he allowed himself to show it. Those details etched themselves into my mind, growing heavier with each passing moment. One afternoon, I saw him walking by, and without thinking, I called out his name. He turned, hesitant as always, but when he stepped closer, I felt my heart skip in a way that embarrassed me. I asked him if he had time for tea, and he nodded, almost shyly, as though the invitation itself was something fragile that we sat across from each other at the small wooden table in my kitchen. I poured the tea, my hands trembling slightly though I tried to hide it. Our conversation was simple. He told me a little about his family, his studies, his plans. But beneath those words, there was a current I couldn't ignore. Every time his gaze met mine, I felt a warmth spread through me, a warmth I hadn't felt in years. There was a moment when our hands brushed as I passed him the sugar, and the touch lingered longer than it should have. It was nothing, really, just skin against skin, but it sent a shiver through me. I pulled my hand back quickly, trying to laugh it off, but inside I was shaken. That single touch had said more than an entire conversation could. I told myself again and again that it was harmless. But harmless things don't make your heart race when you're alone in bed at night, replaying every look, every word, every brush of the hand. Harmless things don't make you choose your clothes more carefully before stepping outside, hoping he might notice. Harmless things don't make you feel alive when you had almost forgotten what it meant that it wasn't long before our moments together grew longer. Sometimes he helped me carry groceries in, sometimes he stayed just a little too long after fixing something around the house. And each time, the silence between us grew heavier, filled with something unsaid yet undeniably present. One evening, as the sun was dipping low, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, we found ourselves walking together down the quiet street. The world felt softer somehow, the air heavy with the kind of stillness that invites confessions. I told him how I often felt invisible, how years of marriage had made me question if I was still the same woman I once was. He listened, really listened, without judgment or interruption. And when he finally spoke, his words were simple but pierced straight into me. "You're not invisible," he said softly. "You're more present than you realize." I didn't know how to respond. My throat tightened, and I could only look away, because in that moment I knew exactly what was happening. My heart was leaning toward him, and every rational thought I had was losing its grip. That night, I sat awake while David slept beside me, his steady breathing filling the room. I stared at the ceiling, torn between guilt and longing. I hadn't crossed any line physically, but my heart had already betrayed him. I had already begun giving pieces of myself to someone else, and the weight of it pressed heavily against me. The next time Ethan came by, the air between us was different. It wasn't just unspoken tension anymore, it was something undeniable. We sat close on the couch, talking quietly about nothing and everything, and there was a moment when his arm brushed against mine. Neither of us moved away. I could feel the warmth radiating from him, and I let myself lean just slightly closer, almost without realizing it. That I knew it was dangerous, but I didn't pull back. For years, I had been starved of touch, of closeness, of intimacy that was more than just routine. And here it was, tempting me in the most subtle yet powerful way. When our eyes met, the world seemed to pause. There was no kiss, no grand gesture, just a look, long and unbroken, that said everything we couldn't. In that silence, I felt exposed, vulnerable, but also more alive than I had in a long time. My pulse quickened, and for a moment, I almost forgot to breathe, and yet, the guilt didn't vanish. It lingered, waiting for me in the quiet moments after Ethan left. I found myself caught between two lives, the one I had built with David, safe and predictable but empty, and the one I was secretly creating with Ethan, thrilling but dangerous. Martha noticed it again one afternoon when we met for coffee. She leaned across the table, her eyes sharp, and asked if there was someone else. I froze, almost spilling my cup, before shaking my head too quickly. But she saw it in my face, in the hesitation I couldn't hide. She didn't push, though. She simply sighed and said, "Be careful, Clara. Temptation always feels sweet, but it leaves a bitter aftertaste." Her words echoed in my mind long after, but they didn't stop me. By then, it was too late. I had already crossed a line in my heart, a line I couldn't erase. I told myself I could still control it, that I wouldn't let it go further, but deep down, I knew control was slipping through my fingers. The truth was simple: I wanted Ethan. Not just his presence, not just his quiet comfort, I wanted the way he made me feel. Desired. Seen. Alive. And in that wanting, I knew I was risking everything.